there is a reason for it. I'll get into it in a moment. But for those who do not know what I do, my organization, I founded one of the earliest exclusive social sector consulting firm in India. They are about 30 years ago. Some of you know. Since then, I have been working primarily in the grassroots sector of our industry. And currently, I am more interested in shaping new institutions and new forms of knowledge through shaping of academic courses as well as creating institutions that work with solutions to our real life problems. So, why synthesis is a solution? And when I talk about Indian knowledge systems, why do I bring this idea or word called synthesis? Because one of the core areas in which we in India, as a country, as a people, are what is our expertise? It's before that, I'll just come to this. Today, just to recap where I read today, some of the challenges as humanity at crossroads today for me is around the clock we have climate catastrophe. I don't have to repeat it here. Several people have spoken about it. Number two, linear consumption patterns, which are continuously promoting a destructive growth paradigm. Surveillance capitalism and machine fetish. We keep seeing people getting techno-fixated solution for every problem in the world without thinking what has been the destruction that is caused by technology earlier. And academic knowledge pursuits often be evaluated through return of investment on short term. This is one of our challenges when we talk particularly in the context of One Health. About 2 weeks ago, I was here, and from Kanpur, I came to Europe, where I addressed a group of farmers who were talking about their side. And one of them said, for a very senior farmer, in the 90s, he turned up. He said, he listened to some of us talk, and then he said, current times, he used this term, very interesting term. He said, Aratin Nirkal. He said that this is a time for Aratin Nirkal. Aram is, as you know, truth. Aratin Nirkal is the term that he used. So, my organization, we conduct dialogues on many of these areas. Last year, we had about 8 lectures on ethics in AI in the Indian context. And this year, we have 3 different titles that are coming up later this next month in November. Challenges of the current systems, because again we use the word systems often. Some of you probably learn about systems as a way of expression. You get to learn about it as a verb much before we learn about systems thinking and how do we approach systems all about. Challenges is today much of our understanding of any phenomena, we use analysis as a tool. And the overemphasis of analysis has been at the cost of synthesis. The number of tools we have developed for analysis, the number of devices we have done, has almost blinded us towards synthesis, which means opening up from the obsession with tools. That's why I say analysis is one of the challenges. Second, unequal distribution of priorities of discipline has meant that some people with practicing certain disciplines look at themselves as being more relevant or more privileged than people who practice other disciplines. This is one of the challenges that is creating a huge amount of inequality in our present society. Third one, unethical commerce. And that leading investments, particularly into research and academia, is creating a completely different ecosystem. And I don't have to talk about the numbers, which are included to know the amount of influence commerce is got on top of any research. The last one, of course, is defining artificial systemic boundaries on natural phenomena or societal phenomena creates a new form of limitation in our understanding, particularly when you're talking about dynamics. the challenge is about 4 5 months ago, I had this dialogue with several IT tech entrepreneurs, and I was invited to talk to them across from all over India. And listening to them about their challenges, I was shocked about where they place their challenges. I will not go into the details of it. I'll share it later. There is an entire article I've written based upon what are the challenges of having entrepreneurs today. Knowledge systems, we can view it in various ways. We can look at knowledge systems, whether it is Indian or non-Indian or whatever term we call it. We can look at it as a product. We can look at it as a live practice, or we can look at it as a responsibility. Much of what Dr. Kumaraguru is talking about and several people spoke about is knowledge as a responsibility. And he embodies it phenomenally. The passion with which he's been carrying on talking about this, I think is one of the most interesting ways in which many traditional practitioners carry this knowledge. Your responsibility to deliver it to the next generation. That is phenomenal. We heard Dr. Janardhan, I think, speak about it in the same level of passion. We heard running agriculture this morning as a responsibility towards the soil. But so many examples all around it. So what is Indian wisdom? I'll quickly come to that. Brahma Sutras, Tattva Samambara, that which holds, but that which state in which we were was Samambara. Samambara is actually equality in things. Our harmony is a state in which things were before things were disturbed. Ekam Sat Mitra Bahuta Bhavanti, a quote that Swami Vivekananda, this picture you have here, it's a beautiful quote that I keep reading that quote. Every time you get a quote, you can read that quote and it's so empowering. So, this is a quote that he had used, Ekam Sat, the truth is one. The learned, the scholars use various names to talk about it. Isha Vasyam Ekam Sat, this is a beautiful line. I'll come to that in a while. Virabhokum Ella Uyirkum Ekam, which means all life is equal. And this is ancient Tamil. Sitting in the land which actually said this 2,000, 5,000 years ago, that all life is made equal. And we talk about one hand in this land. This land actually has been practicing this concept and articulating it from far before. Right? And this is a beautiful quote from Vivekananda I found while preparing for this. He says this, the oneness of all beings, as long as we remember that, the oneness of all beings, if that has with the nation or with the individual, through this perception, realization and practicalization of this eternal truth as he calls it, that is what any solution can be found. Why does it matter today? Dharma, that's another word that we often use. Dharma is a term that we use, but what it means is that which sustains this dharma is ethical practice. Where do we find this? The challenge with many of these things when I mention as terms, and I'm consciously using these terms and giving you concepts today. Where do you find it? Where does it manifest? It manifests all around us as stories in oral traditions. In the 2011 census of India, 19,000 languages were reported as mother tongue by people research. How many mother tongues have you counted? With every language, globally it has been proven, when a language disappears, along with that, knowledge about the entire ecosystem disappears. 19,000 languages are reported as mother tongue. We have, according to the accepted Government of India data, we have nearly 700 spoken languages. The richness of knowledge that these languages have, the richness of biodiversity which we have. Darshan Shankar, whose photo sir is carrying in his book, the founder of the Foundation for Revitalization of Local Knowledge Tradition in India, in a conversation earlier this year, Darshan Shankar told me that among the tribal communities in India, it is known that there are nearly compare it to just working for the tribal communities in this country. I have been sitting with the Irula community in and around Mahabalipur. I have been with the Kanis in Pechpai near Kanyakumari, bottom almost the tail of Western Ghats. The number of herbs that people are adapting, to validate them, to bring them to knowledge, mainstream, is such a phenomenal amount of work that is yet to be done in this country. Why we don't do it? Yesterday, I think it was the evening, Dr. Vinu had mentioned that India spends about 3 to 4% of our GDP in healthcare. Doctor in his slide mentioned about the traditional knowledge systems of healthcare, Siddha, Ayurveda, Unani, etc. We have this Ayush. Ayush gets an allocation of 1% of healthcare investment in this country. Among the healthcare investment, all of indigenous knowledge, total investment share in the amount that the government of India spends is like 1%. And then sometimes researchers who work on with their own money, trying to prove something, whether in Siddha or Ayurveda, like what sir has done, are asked, where is the scientific proof for it? Have you validated it? Where will the irony of it, the amount of money that people have at their disposal is so pathetic. How can they, if given a choice, if you are a doctor, whether you cure somebody or you go and prove to somebody who doesn't anyway believe you that, okay, this medicine works. He has taken this enormous effort to prove it scientifically, to make it valid. Because our entire frameworks are wrong. They are contrary to each other. How do you go about proving something? So that's a challenge that we have often in this. So Indian worldview and the amount of the ways in which we learn. Yesterday I think somebody mentioned this, I heard this, and Indian methods of learning itself is so many. The 6 methods of learning, all of them are agreed upon as valid knowledge in India. Just think of it. Our knowledge reservoir is so huge, if you only accept these as valid methods of knowledge. Out of this, only 1 or 2 is accepted in the modern system of knowledge. How does India translate into food systems? When you talk about food system, where does this come in? So, Annam Bharupur Vita Durgam, says the Upanishad. People, the job of a human being is to produce food in plenty and share it with plenty. That is what is austerity. That's what is austerity. That is what is spiritual practice. Same with Tirupur. Tirupur says, Bhagavatam Palvi it is the foremost value that has been compiled by our ancestors. What? That we conserve the diversity. This is Tiruvallur saying this 2000 years ago. And same with, I had quoted this in the morning with Ramalvar. Adi Kartikur, Nadu Martikur, Udi This is a one health mantra for Tamil Nadu. Namalvar, many of you might have known, right? How many of you have heard of this man? Okay, most of you have. Good. So, I'm happy to see many of the youngsters have heard of this person. He is called the father of organic farming movement in Tamil Nadu. In about 30 years, he changed the face of agriculture in the state by just traveling around. That man was a walking encyclopedia of soil health of the state. He could walk into any village and say what was in the soil before, how the soil has been spoiled, and what is the nature of the soil. This man was a walking encyclopedia of soil. I have had the honor of working with him several times, listening to him and interacting with him. And this particular thing that he said has been told to him by a tribal girl. When he was sitting in a village, this tribal girl walks up to him and she says, "Do you know this, Tata?" He says, "I don't know, tell me." And she says, "Why do we grow this paddy like this?" And then she explains to him, Adi Kartikur, which means the root is for the soil. Nadu, which is the straw, is for the livestock. Nadu, Madu is for cattle. And Nuni, which is the grain, is for wheat. It rhymes so well. So you get the grain to your house. And Namada said, I never realized that the entire wisdom could be made into a and saying like this. And he popularized this. Indian division of knowledge, when Sir has spoken about it, I don't want to take time talking about this, but we actually have Mriga Ayurveda and Vriksha Ayurveda. In Ayurveda, we have animal science called the Mriga Ayurveda. Mriga is animal Ayurveda, and Vriksha Ayurveda, which is the Ayurveda for the herbs and trees. So these are divisions that we already have, but they're all interconnected. Gigi, talks about some of the pharmacopoeia of Ayurvedic medicine, and he says the medicinal property of a particular medicine, as recognized by Ayurveda, cannot be grown as in a field. You can't cultivate it. It has to be grown in the ecosystem. That is why in Ayurveda we have a concept called Pratijiti Drava. Pratijiti Drava in Ayurveda means if a particular medicine in a particular region is grown and you do not have the medicine in another region, you could use a substitute that is grown there with a similar property according to Ayurvedic method of understanding. This is so unique. It is geography. The pharmacopoeia in Ayurveda is geographically located. It is dependent on the forest, the animals, and the ecosystem for it to work on the human beings. That is the beauty of a concept like this. So this is something that we do not understand sometimes because we have understood medicine as a completely different phenomena from it. So this is Gangadhar's very clear indication that medicine works only if it is in the forest, and the forest is as important to human health as much as the medicine you take. It's not just the medicine alone; it's also how you are connected through the medicine to the soil of the region. This is something that I want to mention. I think a couple of people mentioned it yesterday itself. India learns from its practices. So the first ever compilation of pharmacopoeia, that has been all the different medicines that have been used. Artis Malabarica, which is compiled by the Portuguese or the Dutch from the Malabar region. That was compiled by studying the practices that was already there. We look at how much we practice, and from practice we document, and vice versa. From the documentation we go back to practice. So there is a massive amount of practice that goes into theory in India. That's why in Kumaraguru, every time Kumaraguru says something phenomenal, he says this is how it has been said, this is how it has been practiced, this is how it has been held. These are the terms that repeatedly gets used in Kumaraguru. You read Kumaraguru, there are several parts where he mentions it. Because it is a continuum of a knowledge in practice. That is why sometimes it evades the boundaries of a systemic understanding for us. Because it is a dynamic, continuous society. People of India project, Anthropological Survey of India, 72 volumes plus. And in the introductory volume, they talk about the number of occasions every community in India follows. And when they talk about it, they say how every traditional community in India has about 5.5 types of occasions they practice. Each community practices 5.5 different types of skill sets, trades. Out of which only about 1.5 is traditional. Remaining 3 plus is learned, which means India is a continuously learning dynamic society. It's not something that is static. People are not just stuck to one particular knowledge being practiced, they are learning all the time. Gandhi again, just to give you another example, just like Vivekananda. Gandhi, in one of his most important places, he says, if all of Indian civilization, every single literature about India, if all of that disappears, if this one line, the first line of the first Upanishad, if that remains, Isha Vasyam becomes Sarvam. All of this civilization, all of its knowledge can be recreated. What does it say? All that is there, all living beings, are held in a connective space which is given. For me, if you think Gandhi says something that is esoteric, for me the proof of this came when some of us are sitting and talking about what is sustainable development in a village near Madurai. are talking too much of technology, too much of techniques, all these graph, everything. But I know one thing, I live in a village. If 100 families can live in a village together with an understanding that they are dependent on each other and the land around them, the nature around them, that's the word we use, and that which connects them and the nature and with each other, that which connects them is Irai Unarvu. That's the Tamil word he used. Look out for English translation, I won't translate it. So he said, Irai Unarvu. That is what connects us. We are connected in Irai Unarvu. If that is the connection we have, then that is sustainable development. Now with a more profound theory. Recently I was sitting with a Yurulan tribal lady, and they make small medicinal preparation from the herbs from the forest. They are Mahabalipuram, beautiful center. And I was sitting with them, I go there often, just sit and chat with these tribal ladies. And I asked them, they said, government officers had come like you last week. I said, what did they say? They said they will give us a loan. And we have to grow this enterprise much bigger. And we should scale up and become a billionaire kind of thing. And they said it in the lab. So I asked her, so what did you respond? She said, no, we are all senior officers. What can I tell them? And kept silent. I said, but what do you think? Do you think you should make this? And she gave me this beautiful one-line response. She said, how can my enterprise grow faster than the forest? She said, my enterprise is dependent on the forest. How can it grow faster than the forest? I mean, tell me a bigger wisdom than this that can talk about one than this world. Right? This is in that tribal community. You go to the Kumba community up in Nilgiris, or the Irundals in the plains, or you go to the Thanis, any of these people, they have this knowledge. You go to the farmers in Europe, they have this knowledge. Unfortunately, we have stopped looking at them as the people who can give us wisdom. We have reduced them into beneficiaries of government projects. That's why we end up not learning from them. Much of the practices have been institutionalized. I will not go into it. I ran an entire program on Indian system of management. Huge number of institutions. I have studied institutions of governance among tribal communities, fishing communities, captive communities across India. And that is my entire area of research work, because I teach people called the Indian system of management. If you're interested, approach me separately later, I talk about this. But the number of things, how the practices have been captured and transmitted in this country is through oral tradition, is through art forms, is through folklore, is through music, dance, as well as through community institutions that communities across India have created over a period of time. I'll just quickly go through this. There is an entire program called Green Economy that I teach in separate universities now. I'll just talk only about one thing. Re-establishing respect. This is based upon Gandhi's concept of economy, J.C. Kumaraguru concept of economy of governance. And one of the most important parts that we talk about is how to re-establish respectful engagement with the soil and other beings and other species that inhabit the soil. So, something that has been in our folklore, but which has come out more recently in the last 10 years, phenomenal amount of new area of scientific research that has been coming up is this entire area of plant intelligence. The kind of new discoveries, because what artificial intelligence has made available to us today is our sensitivity to listen to noises of communication between plants, between animals, which we are not able to listen to earlier. These sensors are now available. Similarly, large amount of data to be compressed and listened to. Recently I heard from a scientist who works with elephants in Africa, and she said something that was mind-blowing. What she said was how, when they looked at the noise that the elephants make, which we cannot hear with our human ears, across large areas they can transmit from one end of the forest to another, they found a unique pattern. The pattern they found was that when elephants make this noise, they make a particular pattern of noise. Then a particular elephant from the other end of the forest responds to this. And the scientist told me specific sound marker that identifies this particular elephant. So only that elephant responds. I said, in human society we call it names. She said, yeah, that's what it is. So elephants identify each other and actually call by name from one part of the forest to another. Just imagine how different it is when you think of it. These are information that we didn't know. We were not having the kind of gadgets to measure these things, to analyze these things, to learn these things before. Plants communicate with each other. We know that. Plants have a certain habit of, there's so much of insights that are coming out. If any of you want to learn on this space, I would encourage you to, because it's one of the fastest growing areas of research that is probably going to change the way we look at nature significantly in the next 10 to 15 years. If not earlier. Synthesis is a solution. I'll take maybe just 2 more slides and finish with that. And then so one is synthesis is a primary feature of knowledge and action. Unless it becomes a primary feature, we actually talk about synthesis, not convergence. Because government officials and people, when I ask them what is convergence, often I get various responses. One officer very bluntly told me, convergence is doing our work with somebody else's money. Another department's money I take, and then I do my work, that is convergence work. So this is the kind of way we accuse these terms also. Because convergence, government of India has been trying to bring convergence as a way of working, bringing departments together, but it doesn't seem to happen. Break the discipline barriers in academia and create new ones if possible. One of the biggest academic disciplines that need to be definitely dismantled is economics. Almost all of our theories around economics is fundamentally against the last 30-40 years of sustainable development and all these. Because who's talking about sustainable development? Have you ever seen a mainstream economist talk about it? Or climate change? Once I spoke to an economist in, we had all the funding agencies of European governments having a meeting in Berlin sometime. And I was asking this very senior economist from London, why can't you change the bachelor's course in economics? And she said, you're destroying me. I'll be destroyed if I attempt something like that. This is not possible. So economics is an area. Yesterday, Professor Rishi spoke, mentioned about anthropology. It's great that humanity is coming. But then, the elephant in the room is economics. Economists still goes against, when they have learned anything in the last 30 years of climate change and it's hard on economy. They keep continuing to churn out the same economic models and time and again. That's why we need to bring many of the Indian community-based institutions' economic models into play, because they have a different ethos. Invest in ethical can we bring in a different framework, like what Sir is talking about? For instance, I was in the method of treating trees or cattle. For instance, is it okay for us to do dosha analysis? I do dosha analysis sometimes for human resource development department. I look at who is the Vata, Kapha, property, and what is the job description they have, and how much are their jobs fitment with the property of the individual. Okay? So, can we attack the framework, the tools, the methods of understanding that we bring to play? Can we add it at that level? Not merely at the level of practices, but to answer your question, of course, yes, we need to do that. Otherwise, I remember once Sudhir Thakur, the famous psychoanalyst, he once said that if India does not bring its own practices into fore, knowledge to fore, we will be reduced to the gutters of international psychology. That's what he said. So that is the state that we are in many of these areas, particularly when we talk about climate change and sustainability.
Just
Yes, sir. You. I can answer.
So many things is not slightly incompetent because of the complexity of issues they deal with, like Indian philosophy has got to be understood in a very different perspective. I'm just asking a very general question for the benefit of the audience as well. You have the privilege, like me, working in different sectoral areas within the thing, but you are much more very different, unique in that sense. You work with international agencies, reviewing things. You also work with government agencies and also the grassroots level. It's a privilege, and I think you love it, otherwise you can't do that. So, what do you think are essential approach or steps to connect these points to make this kind of convergence or synthesis to happen in India? Just one or two points.
My major point is don't reduce rural folk or practitioners to beneficiaries of products. First and foremost, look at knowledge from everywhere. Respect knowledge from everywhere. Second part I would say is evolve localized solutions. Don't bring this large scale capital intensive solutions that do not make sense. Ultimately, regardless of what technology we use or what solutions we bring to play, we are a country where 80% of our population cannot afford any of these solutions. Is it affordable for the person? The third thing I would say is probably the most important thing. Gandhiji in his talisman said it very beautifully. He said, when you have doubt in life, think of the face the poorest person in your mind. Will it benefit him? And then he doesn't stop there. Then he goes on to say, will it give him control over his life? That's the second part of talisman. Many people don't quote it. I was corrected, Professor Swaminathan. He only quoted the first part. I said, no, the second part is equally important. That's very important. That it has to be with dignity. That people cannot be reduced to beneficiaries of largesse. They need to have the sense of pride and dignity in what they do and get a control of their life. So the social side of it is as important as the solution that is provided. People should feel that they are not lesser than any other person. That is a basic human quality everybody deserves. So this is something that, these are 3 points. You asked me one, I give you 3.
I just have a wonderful presentation and totally a new perspective to look at everything. And I just have only one question. And you're being, and this is something different from one else, I think. You have told about Indian systems of management. Is it practiced anywhere in India, and any example of that?
I give a 30-hour semester long program. So asking that question and different person rather than immediately because I'm worried that I'm get stamped. But everywhere, everywhere. I'll give you one example. You know Virudhunagar?
Yeah.
You're from which part of Tamil Nadu?
I'm from everywhere, sir. I'm in Nagarkoi.
Nagarkoi. So that is, you're not far away. Because if you're southern Tamil Nadu, you understand. Virudhunagar today is a district. Anybody from Virudhunagar here? Virudhunagar? Two people. Fantastic. What is so powerful about Virudhunagar and education now? This is the most popular school, the largest school in Virudhunagar.
There'll be too many.
A very big name. Kshatriya Nada Kshatriya Vidyasala. Biggest name. The school with the largest number of students studying in this town. Virudhunagar is a very small district. And the town is even smaller. Its population is less than 1 lakh, or maybe just about 1 lakh and plus now. But that town has got more than 50 educational institutions from primary all the way to higher education and more. And the education in that town is completely subsidized by this one community, the Nada community. And how did they start? And if you go to Kshatriya Vidyasala, you look at their logo. In the logo, there will be a pot with a handful of rice being put into it. As you know, about 100 years ago, many of you have studied sociology, you have studied caste and tribes by Thurston and all that. You know this is a community that was outcast about 100 years ago. They are not permitted into the villages. They are often reduced to being in the tables.
I was knowing.
You know that. So, famous work of many of the anthropologists the early days has been on the Nada community. So, when this community decided they want to learn and study, they set up their own education. They didn't have money. They started by asking every household to put aside a handful of rice every time they cook in a pot. That was collected and they created a bank of rice that was auctioned at the end of the week. And that money went on to support the very first school they created. Today, that community's total educational institutions, asset alone, is running into several thousand crores. They have provided free education, but I have seen their principles they have written for themselves. So one of the first principles is we were denied education. We will not deny education on any basis to anybody else who comes to our institution. And then they write, and this is by people who are not educated, by the way. They themselves are not literate. Then they wrote these principles for themselves. They said we will collect money from among ourselves and make this into a self-sustaining institution which we will run. In less than 100 years, this community created and is educated. And if you look at the last 35-40 years of high school pass rate in Tamil Nadu, this is the number one district in Tamil Nadu. Highest pass out rate out of schooling. All because one community decided, just because we were denied education, we will provide, we will not depend on the state, we will not depend on the market. They did it out of their own. Their community institution today, this community tax, now it is called community tax, it's called Magami. Now they have Aksikada Magami, Panchikada Magami, Malikada Magami, they have multiple Magami that is happening in every community there. And it is a percentage of every transaction they do. Earlier it was a contribution voluntary. Now it is a percentage of every transaction that we make, and that percentage of transaction goes to create community assets. And community assets include not just schools and longer. It includes water bodies. It includes the upkeep of the temples. It includes a lot of things. There are smaller communities in Tamil Nadu where they create and manage banks. Velarapattikulu, next to Nagam. If you go there, they are one of the most compassionate banks you will ever come across. There, it's another community, different community. This community, everybody goes 5 years, when they are young men go 5 years to Singapore, Malaysia, etc. Work as road line laborers, bring back extra money to redo their house, to redo their, buy a vehicle, repair the house or whatever. And these community of farmers, otherwise they are sustenance farmers. Just these 3-4 years they go out to just bring in extra money into the village. So, they didn't have money to send these youth abroad. What do? They set up a bank. What does the bank do? The bank lends, again money from every household, created a pocket, and it lends money to people who want to go abroad. When When you go abroad, you pay the interest, then you put some monthly money into your community. So that you create a fund, and using the fund, you are funding all subsequent people. Now every household has got at least 3-4 people who went abroad and came back. And with that money, they created a theatre for the village. They created a community center for the village. They revived all the water bodies in the village. They created that. So this is
what known as Indian system of management.
I'm just giving you community examples from just small farming communities in Tamil Nadu.
Sorry to be interrupting, sir.
But there are many. I can go to trading communities. I can
Okay,
go to
we
farming
will talk
communities.
about
Like I said, I do a 30-hour semester-long program on this. I give you like 200 case studies across India. And once I do that, most times
probably I can join that and
please.
come now.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir, for the enlightening session on cultural importance and economics.